feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Conversation. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rorabeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchen.
Matt, we're talking more about Venom, apparently.
Venom. Yes, you guys can go check out our review of Venom, Let There Be Carnage on Untitled Movie Reviews or on the Untitled Movie YouTube channel if you want a video format of that. But right now, Eric and I are going to do something different, something I want to do more on this channel, which weirdly enough, the other time we did this was also for a Spider-Man property.
Which for the trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home.
It was. So first off, I apologize for my weird camera angle. I do have red lights in honor of the titular Carnage. But I'm in the process of moving, so you're going to see my background change eventually anyway. But I'm using weird camera setups and my desk's in a weird spot, but it might go back to normal. It might not. So anyways, if you're watching the video version, I apologize if it'll be a little wonky over the next couple weeks. That being said, Eric and I are going to have a spoiler-filled discussion about the Venom Let There Be Carnage post-credits sequence. So that being said, if you haven't seen Venom Let There Be Carnage, honestly, the post-credit sequence is the best part of the movie, or the only interesting part of the movie, IMO. You could skip the movie, just read what the post-credit sequence is, or I'm sure you'll be able to see that footage soon or listen to us talk about it. So like if you haven't seen it, but you still want to know what it is and want to hear us talk about it, or maybe you already know what it is and want to hear us talk about it, I think you're fine, but we will go into full spoilers in a couple seconds. So if you want to get our review, which is mostly spoiler free, go check that out. It's 35 minutes of Eric and I talking about it. There are some things to like, but overall, just doesn't work. That being said, Eric, this post-credit sequence, quite hyped up since people saw the screening of Venom. I think while we were at TIFF, I remember there was a screening and this scene leaked already. I think that people could, I kind of assumed what it was going to be based on, oh my God, I can't believe what the post-credit sequence was. I'm like, well, I kind of have a feeling I know what it is now.
It's your classic case of corporate synergy.
Yeah. So spoilers happening in 3, 2, 1. So movie ends. Venom defeats Carnage. He eats him. Great. That sure. And then Venom and Eddie are on vacation, it looks like. And
well, they're kind of on the run, right?
On the run. They're on the beach. They're hanging out. They're being bros. And then Venom, their post-credit sequence happens. He's lying in bed. Venom pops out, goes, Eddie, I can show you.
Why does he sound like Watto?
So he's like, I can show you what other symbiotes have gone through.
I can show
and it
you
almost feels like in that moment, I don't know if you felt the same. Yeah. If you felt the same, Eric, I felt in that moment when he says, oh, I can show you other universes where other symbiotes like experience. I thought they were going to show a clip from like Spider-Man 3 with Topher Grace,
which would have been, I think, actually would have worked better.
Would have been better. But then you kind of get this like in WandaVision kind of thing with like it reminded me of that effect in WandaVision when Wanda would change what's happening in the town, where Eddie wakes up, but he gets put into a different hotel room. He turns on the TV, and then on the TV is J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons talking about, Spider-Man getting not doxxed, but unmasked by Mysterio.
It's basically the events of the end of the events of No Way Home that we're seeing, that same newsreel of J.K. Simmons is J. Jonah Jameson basically
exposing
saying,
Peter Parker,
Peter Parker is the public enemy #1 and all this stuff. And then Venom, the symbiote sort of takes over and licks the TV screen and says, that guy. And basically, watching that and what it's saying is that, and even seeing the trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home before the movie,
which we did a conversation on,
yes, is basically saying that Venom is now in the MCU, at least for this upcoming movie, which it looks like. I would be kind of surprised if he wasn't, and I'm sure probably by, sometime next week. We're recording this on the Friday, October the 1st, when it's when the film Venom Carnage Let There Be, or Venom Let There Be Carnage, Carnage the movie, Carnage everywhere, is being released.
Did you love that he said "Let there be carnage" in the
No, I
movie?
didn't. I did not care for that one bit, sir. So with that, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear an official announcement made in the not too distant future.
Yeah, when do you think they would do that, or they just don't, and then you're left guessing based on that sequence? But
Or there's another trailer before the release that'll have him in it, because that's the question that I think will be most interesting with Eddie
I
Brock
think
as
that
Venom.
makes sense. If you already show Doc Ock and you have the Goblin laugh and stuff like that, they were probably waiting. So you
Yeah.
think there's no? Here's my problem with it. Okay, so like I'm again, I don't like either Venom movie. To me, they're more frustrating than enjoyable. But there are some, okay, I give Hardy credit for that's your take on Eddie Brock and Venom. Cool. The back and forth of them, I don't hate it. And then I'm like, maybe it can be utilized well in the MCU. Is this a permanent thing? Is it just for the next movie? Maybe after all this multiverse stuff is done, ultimately it seems like the first step to have, I see it more as Tom Holland being able to be used in the Sony Spider-Man movies rather than the other way around. Like, I think the MCU is the gateway to that. And then that's why you have a character like Venom pop up in the next Spider-Man movie. And then that's kind of the bridge to have Tom Holland's Spider-Man interact with these characters and it still be different universes. So say the Doctor Strange stuff in Spider-Man, or maybe Multiverse of Madness. Weirdly, wouldn't it be weird if Venom was in Sam Raimi's
Which that could happen. I mean,
um,
you never know. I mean, Sam Raimi was just interviewed, I think, on Collider
talking
or
about how
something
much
like
he
that.
hates that movie, and
Well, not that he hates it. That it's just
but
that
he was scared to do another superhero movie.
yes,
because
of the reaction of Spider-Man 3. And if you read the history of the making of that movie, he wanted it to be about Sandman as the villain and
well,
not
that's why
Venom.
I think it would
and
be
Venom
funny if
was...
they they're like, "Hey, you have to put Venom in this movie," and he's like, "Not again, not again."
But we could see the origin of Venom getting the white spider on
and I'm cool with that. Like, again, obviously I want Spider-Man and Venom to interact. Like, that's why I love the character Venom in the 90s. We talked about that in our review. Like, we grew up during the introduction of that character. And I think every kid growing up with the animated show, and if you read the comics, like, Venom was fucking dope. And that's why these movies are successful, because I feel like it's a lot of people our age that grew up with the introduction of that character and like that character. He has such a cool look, and like and he was great in the animated show and stuff like that. So
voiced by Hank Azaria.
yeah, so yeah, that's true. Eddie Brock wasn't he? And then I I love the idea of him interacting with Spider-Man. I just wish it was introduced in a different way. Like, I still have a problem of them doing these Venom movies first and then introducing him as an anti-hero, and you're already kind of cheering for Venom in these two movies.
Well,
So,
you still
like,
could be. We don't know that as an answer yet. Like, from what I'm interpreting, and this is just based on what we've seen and what have you, is he'll probably start out as a villain, or at least be an adversary to Spider-Man, thinking that Spider-Man is a villain himself, and that's why
because
he's
that's all
going...
he knows of him is on the news saying
Yes,
that
and
he's
he's
a bad
going
guy.
after him and wanting
Yes,
to eat
that's a
his
great
brains.
point. Yeah, that's a
And
great point.
I think what will end up happening is you'll have this team up of Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, and
Tom Hardy
Tom Hardy, and
with what's his name, Tom
and
Holland.
yeah, and maybe even Charlie Cox, if he's supposed to be Daredevil in this. Like, I think that if you're going to introduce the Sinister Six, Peter's
You
gonna...
almost need a team of people, right?
Yeah, and so you're gonna have that one character who's kind of like the one who starts out as the bad guy, or isn't the bad guy but sees Peter as the bad guy, and you have them maybe clashing for a scene or two, and then ultimately Venom realizes that he's actually not the villain, and then he teams up ultimately with the other Spider-Men and Daredevil or whoever else is being brought into that. But then looking at it even from not just the point of view of Venom, is thinking about, okay, Morbius has been delayed several times, but is still on the way, and that's with Jared Leto. And you made a really sort of keen observation with that first trailer, where in the background you see a Spider-Man figure plastered on the wall, and it resembles more of the Sam Raimi,
yeah.
Tobey Maguire Spider-Man,
but still says murderer over it, right? So
Yes.
it's, you got this weird amalgamation of, you know, certain things that were happening in the MCU, but different costumes. So whether it's Tom Holland wears a version of that costume from, you know, the Raimi movies or something like that, like it's going to be really interesting. And I'm not like, I was frustrated watching it and I was a little underwhelmed at the scene because like Tom Holland's not actually in this scene. J.K. Simmons is the same video or a version of it that was in No Way Home. So it's like not like either of those characters actually show up. You just see images of them, you know, in the Venom movie. So then, you know, these universes are being crossed. And I think you make a great point, Eric, that that's exactly how I, now that you've said it, see it playing out. And like there was that photo of Tom Hardy with the Spider-Man No Way Home like production cap on that people were like, bro, you can't be wearing
You're
that in
burying the
public."
lead, though.
Yeah.
He was wearing also a Cobra Kai shirt, wasn't he?
Was he?
Yeah.
Nice. Love that. Hopefully he shows up on that show too as Venom. Also a Sony show, isn't it?
I think so, or at least it's
Yeah.
like it's co-produced by Sony with Netflix distributing.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, of course, Venom and Spider-Man interacting like is awesome. I don't know if this is my favorite interpretation of Venom, but I'd be curious to see what that character with an MCU lens on it is. Like, it's probably the same character, but I don't know, with John Watts and, you know, and Kevin Feige being involved and stuff like that. Like that, you know, I feel like has potential, but then it's where do you go from after that? Like, I do agree that, you know, it's probably Doctor Strange and Spider-Man trying to find other spider people to help them because they've unleashed the Sinister Six, multiverse Sinister Six on them. So they know that there's these Spider-Men in other universes. There's this guy who's sort of spider-like, but he's an alien.
But then you
Spider-Man
could have
like,
some really
but
interesting
like,
stuff there, even with Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, depending on
right.
where that Spider-Man is taken out of his continuity. Because if it's after Spider-Man 3, well, then he's dealt with a version of Eddie Brock's
But
Venom.
it almost looks like it's going to be during Spider-Man 2. So he
But
might
then
not have
how would
had
that
the
explain,
experiences.
like, if Sandman's in it then?
That's a good point. Good point.
Because if Sandman,
but we don't know who Sandman is.
No, we don't
think.
know. But everybody's
So who do you think the
speculating.
6 is going to be? Like, now I think you're right, and Venom's going to be start off as a hero because you make a great point about he's going to
start
see
off
that
as a villain in the point of view of Spider-Man's eyes. And
he's going to think he's a hero. He's going to think Peter is a villain.
yes.
And he's going to look at that newscast and say, this guy killed this motherfucker. We need to go
Lunchtime.
get him. Yeah, we need to go do this. We are a hero. We're the what's the name?
The
of
lethal
the
protectors.
protector. Yeah. So I think the lethal protector, aka Venom, will go to try and stop Peter going, oh, it's a super powered being. That's a spider, Spider-Man. That I have to stop. And then you get the Sinister Six, which is Doc Ock,
Green Goblin,
Sandman. Do you think Mysterio comes back?
It's a good question. I mean, he is mentioned and he does play a pivotal part of setting this
Is
whole
Sandman
thing
there?
up.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, that I know.
Well, Electro, we're forgetting.
Electro, sorry. Yeah. Jamie Foxx, you keep forgetting that he's in there, right?
Yeah. Because you need to have at least someone from Garfield's universe.
So you have Electro, you have Doc Ock, you have Green Goblin. So that's 3.
Yeah.
Then you got to think Vulture, right?
I hope so, because I mean, Michael Keaton is in the trailer for Morbius, right? So
I don't know how that movie fits into any of this.
Well, you know what where I could see that kind of fitting in more so if it is to connect to the MCU is that they're going to have him maybe do something similar with Blade maybe down the line, because Morbius has always been the character that's like, even in the Stephen Norrington Blade movie, like the first Wesley Snipes film, there's a deleted scene where they were setting up Morbius as the next villain for Blade 2. And even in the 90s animated series, Morbius and Blade have always been at odds with each other, because Blade is the vampire hunter who also is part vampire, and one of his sort of main crusades is to chase down Morbius until they sort of join forces. So I
Yeah.
could see them setting that up, and then with Craven, with Aaron Taylor Johnson
Oh,
being
right.
cast in the role,
This Spider-Man
and
universe over at
JC
Sony.
Chandor being tied to direct it. Craven has always played a huge part in the Spider-Man lore of chasing down Spider-Man when Spider-Man becomes Man Spider, right? And sort of goes from, the jungle to the concrete jungle, and chasing him down. And then other characters that we have heard stuff about, we've heard about a Black Cat spin-off, and we've also heard things about Madam Spider. I think Olivia Wilde at one point was attached to direct the film. I don't know if she still is. But I mean, you made an interesting point that maybe, moving down the line, this is giving Sony the license to bring Tom Holland into these movies, or at least set up something that, they can have the fourth Spider-Man movie be about all of these characters interacting
I
in
think
some
that's
way.
where we're heading, man. Like, I
Yeah.
think this is more one for you, a bunch for me kind of thing. Like, it was probably part of that deal that Holland signed with Disney and Sony, or what Sony signed with Disney, and Holland's contract runs up after this one, or and then he has one MCU movie that he can appear in as well, right? As like a side character. Um and then I think that's it. And then he'll have to renegotiate, and I'm sure he'll stick around and get like a metric ass ton of money. But yeah, I can see them wanting to do their own thing, and the multiverse thing is a perfect excuse. It's just like, okay, well, it's a different universe, so once this universe stuff gets fixed, he can jump around. I don't know, or maybe there's two versions of Tom
Jump,
Holland
jump,
Spider-Man.
jump around.
um Maybe he sees another version of himself from the Sony verse in this, right? Like, there could be two Tom Holland Spider-Mans in
Emo
this. Like,
Spider-Man.
God, I hope so. I don't know. I have no fucking idea, but like, it's interesting that Disney and Sony are playing even more nice than just Spider-Man, right? Like,
But it's also
um
strange to think about the coordination of all of this, because Venom Let There Be Carnage was briefly there, rescheduled to come out in January or February next year, and then they moved it back to October. I don't know if that.
but it never did push to next year. I think you're thinking in one of the previous delays. I think there was a time where it was after Spider-Man No Way Home, but it
Right,
never officially
but
got
if
pushed.
that did happen, like, how would any of that make sense? Because again, like, they can kind of get away with that a little bit with the whole Black Widow, Falcon and the Winter Soldier thing, but I
Yeah.
wonder, like, if how recent that post credit scene was shot or was put together, because, like, to me it almost feels like maybe it was because of this whole, like, maybe Venom Let There Be Carnage was already well in the works, and it was kind of like, okay, now that Disney and Sony are working together on this, and Marvel as well, um maybe that there's an opportunity there to shoot this and be like, okay, we don't have to necessarily commit to it, but
Right.
we can. Because I mean, the other thing is that he might not even be in the movie. We don't know yet officially, and it might be something that is kind of like something to your point of view, where like maybe the next Venom movie will have Spider-Man as the main sort of quote unquote villain. Maybe that's
Yeah,
the other thing as well.
it could not have anything to do with No Way Home. You'd have to think it does, but
Right.
like it would seem weird to not do that, but you're not wrong either. Like, it could just be teasing after whatever the events of No Way Home. Maybe it sends this Spider-Man into a different universe, or but it does look like he entered the MCU universe, so I
But
don't
I could
know.
see the next, like, Venom movie taking the MCU and using parts of the MCU for Venom 3, like, again,
Right,
like
that's
Tom
true
Holland
too. Yeah.
specifically, where, like, after the events of No Way Home, you could have the setup for Venom 3 being the villain in Venom 3 is Spider-Man. from the point of
Right.
view of Venom, right?
Right,
And
right,
that
right.
almost could be another way of looking at it if that were if Venom doesn't appear in No Way Home, where like because you look at Venom, I'm not as like I know Venom, but I'm not versed in like his rogues gallery with the exception of Carnage, who's also a Spider-Man villain, and to me Carnage is like the big baddie
Venom, yeah,
in the
and
Venom
Spider-Man,
universe,
and
and
yeah.
now they've used him. So where do you go from there? So why not make the villain Spider-Man from the point of view of Venom, and
I
then
wonder how long Tom Holland, or not Tom Holland, Tom Hardy, got too many Toms.
and they're
And
all British.
and they all start with H something. Um Tom Hardy wants to keep doing Venom 4
He
too,
seems to
because
like
like
it though. Like that's the thing with him. Like Tom Hardy, I think is a really great actor. He's also a physically kind of commanding presence. Um, and he's one of those guys where like you look at Brosnan and you look at some of the other stuff that he's done outside of working with Nolan. He's one of those guys that's always kind of like committed to the part, and he kind of really does seem to like the character. So I'm assuming that it's kind of one of those things where yeah, he probably has signed a
but
contract to
he's in
do at
his
least
40s, right?
2 or 3 films, right? Yes, he is in his 40s, but you can still I mean, how long
I
has Robert Downey
understand, but
Jr. been
like
doing
I don't
Iron
know.
Man
To
4?
me, so here's my pitch. My pitch is you do one more Venom movie with Tom Hardy, he does a trilogy, right? I think that's a lot. Like I think that's enough. So,
But you're coming also
um
from the point of view of you're not putting your bias aside that you don't like the movies, where Hardy again seems to really like these films, partly because he likes the character, and also he seems to be gaining more
I'm
creative
just saying,
control.
okay, I understand. Um he's going to do Spider-Man No Way Home. Let's just say that. He's in the MCU now, sort of. Um Next movie he's going to be what, 47, because he's 44 right now.
Right.
That's getting pretty old to play Venom. And I just think that character, um you can't have a 50 something year old Eddie Brock running around. Like I know Tom Hardy looks young. um I just don't. To me, 3 is a good amount. A trilogy, you did your part, Tom. People liked your take on it. That's great. But now that he's in the MCU, I would love, my thing is that I would love for in Spider-Man No Way Home or something soon that they integrate Flash Thompson's Venom soon, or maybe it's after the third um Venom movie, and because now that it's in the MCU, maybe you bring in Tony Ravioli, and you have his Flash Thompson lose his legs like he does in the comics, and like he always had this love for Spider-Man and things like this, and then I love that character getting the symbiote because it empowers him because he's able to walk again, and he joins the army, and or that's how he loses his, I believe so, loses his legs in the army. And then he becomes like Agent Venom, and it's kind of an interesting thing where it's kind of, I don't know if I've shown you pictures
You
before,
have,
Eric.
yeah.
And it's kind of a military-esque Venom, and he works for the government, and uh I just think that could be a really cool different take on the character, that you could still have elements of what people liked in in the first 3 Venom movies, because I'm pitching this being, Venom 4 and onward, after you've now put it in the MCU kind of thing, but Sony takes back part of that. Um, and I think you could do Agent Venom, which I think could be really, really cool, where you have the big, brutal, violent Venom biting people's heads off, and he hulks out essentially, like to the big hulking Venom that we get. But you also get kind of a spy Mission Impossible sort of Venom movie, but he's able to kind of use the symbiote in weird and cool ways, but also being that kind of spy thriller sort of thing. And you kind of take the franchise and make it something new. So what I would love is, yeah, use Flash Thompson in that way. I don't know if, I think he could carry his own movie. But I don't know. Like I
See, that's where I'm thinking
kind
where
of maybe
like
not.
they would reboot. As much as I like Tony Ravioli from Grand Budapest Hotel, you have to look at it from the point of view of a studio thinking like, are we going to,
I think you give him a
y-
shot. I don't know. You
well,
keep the
no, I'm
same
not. I'm not
Venom
against that,
voice and
but you're
like,
gonna also have to cast like because like a part of like you can look at it from the point of view of like okay, someone like Christopher Reeves in Superman, was basically a soap opera actor before he was cast in that role, and was kind of a relative unknown at the time. But what Warner Brothers did was that they cast Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando and Glenn Ford, um, people that were big names in the supporting roles. But then again, I can also see Sony being like, well, we need a name to sort of pitch as the lead. There's it's very rare that it happens, but again, like DC seems to be more um open to that kind of stuff when it comes to Aquaman, or even Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. You look at Jason Momoa and Gal Gadot before those movies. They had bit parts in
Yeah.
Fast and the Furious, and Jason Momoa was on Stargate SG-1. Like it was like, again, you center it around the material, right, the property. So I'm not saying that it isn't possible, but I'm
Yeah.
also thinking like, okay, it just depends. It's just, what are they thinking? Because again, like even Tom Holland, yeah, he did some stuff before. He was a child actor. He was in The Impossible, and has appeared in many movies. But what people now know him for, or what is kind of boosted his career, is Spider-Man.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. There's also Anti-Venom, which is another kind of character which is, I think, also Eddie Brock. It's who he becomes when the Venom symbiote goes on to someone else. And there's like a whole plot line there of him getting cancer and it curing his cancer after, Scorpion becomes Venom at one point as well. So there's like other people, and I know that they've kind of teased Scorpion in Spider-Man as well. Um, so there's a lot
But
of different.
Scorpion, to me, almost felt like they were with Homecoming, like Scorpion and the Shocker were kind of like C tier villains within this version of the MCU, where they weren't
I
necessarily
agree. Yeah.
going to be the big threats, where Mysterio, Vulture, and those guys are more kind of the big names. And now you're bringing in these legacy actors to reprise their roles in other movies, where um I think that would kind of be interesting if, like, they did bring in somebody that maybe overlapped, and the only one that I can think of that so far overlapped is Venom. Like, if they brought in Topher Grace's Venom and Tom
Sure.
Hardy's Venom, that might be interesting. Or if there was a character, like if they brought in, Dylan Baker's Doc Connors, and brought in Risa Fons as Doc Connors, because Risa Fons got to play both the Doctor and the monster as the Lizard, where throughout Raimi's Spider-Man movies 2 and 3, Dylan Baker was always kind of being positioned
Hmm.
potentially for a fourth or fifth movie down the line to become the Lizard, and it just never happened.
Yeah. There's also Null, who is the god of the symbiotes. So,
What
I don't
about
know.
Void? Null and Void?
Yeah. So we'll see, man. As a big MCU guy, obviously, like I'm really curious to see how they integrate Venom, but I think you've actually nailed it, Eric. Like I could see it starting with, the first encounter is Venom coming after Peter, thinking Peter is a bad guy, and then ultimately teaming up with Peter and the other Spider-Men. Um, I hope we get some surprises too, like, whether there's some integration with the Into the Spider-Verse characters. Imagine Nick Cage showing up as
Ghost Rider? Well,
Spider-Man Black and White,
you know, as Ghost Rider.
or Spider-Man Noir. Yeah,
uh, Nick Cage's Ghost Rider again, Johnny Blaze. Well, the other character that I could, I mean, maybe I don't think it will happen, but in terms of looking at it from that point of view of Spider-Man becoming sort of Peter Parker being exposed as being Spider-Man, and maybe potentially becoming a target. The other character that's introduced in the 90s animated series, and that's kind of their introduction, is the Punisher. The
yeah,
Punisher is always usually after, high value targets, and I could see them bringing, because didn't John Bernthal also do an audition with Tom Holland? Like they said, like they helped each other shoot their auditions for Marvel when they were doing both the
It's
Punisher
possible.
and Spider-Man.
I
Because
mean, I
that's,
think those Netflix characters, there's rumors that Kingpin is going to be in Hawkeye,
yeah.
like Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin, because Kingpin plays like a pretty integral part in that storyline. And then there are rumors that Charlie Cox is going to be in No Way Home. So you could see, I would love for them to, John Bernthal's Punisher. Like, I don't know what you do with those characters. You probably do the same thing you did with Venom, right? Where they're getting brought in from different universes or something, and that's how they're kind of gonna get away with a lot
but
of
but
this. But
wasn't at least Daredevil, because yeah, because also Punisher's a part of that, was in the MCU to begin with.
loosely, so like they kind of were, but then also not. It's just like Agents of Shield, right? Like
Right.
that's technically MCU, but then Kevin Feige's like, well, not really. Like it's using our continuity, but we don't consider it in continuity. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
like
because
it
in Daredevil, I remember there like in
the
like one of the
newspaper talks
newspaper,
about,
yeah.
yeah, the Battle of New York, and like they do reference the MCU stuff here and there, but I think they got further and further away from that because anything that Marvel Television did, it seems like Marvel Studios is, even though they were using the Marvel Studios canon, Marvel Studios is now saying none of that is actually canon. Like anything the television team touched is not canon. They might pick and choose who they want to take from those shows, but they're either going to reestablish them or they're going to do what we just saw in Venom, where they pulled them from whatever weird universe that was sort of like the MCU, but it's not completely the MCU, or it was a different version of the MCU. Like I think What If, which we're seeing right now, is sort of planting the seeds for a lot of that stuff too. And I think we'll have more implications in the live action stuff than we thought. But
Because X-Men probably will also maybe factor into that a little bit as well. I could see moving down
yeah,
the line, where not now, but like, maybe at the end of phase 4 into phase 5, where like if you wanted to, if you like, you could still bring in Hugh Jackman to do one of these
one movie with
movies.
Deadpool or something
Yeah.
like that. Like,
And if Deadpool's also going to be,
he's
integrated
plucked,
into
and
the
that's how
MCU,
the multiverse stuff is their solution for all of this shit, right? Like
it's the one quick fix, right?
it is, and it's, I think it's a cool way to do it because we haven't really dealt, like comics have dealt with multiverse stuff, and it gets, bogged down in continuity, and like eventually you're just going to have, comics have a reset point, right? And whether these lawsuits happen where the rights revert back to Ditko and Stan Lee's estate, and like, or characters revert back to their original owner, like they'll have to fix a lot of this stuff through stuff like this. And they're kind of cleaning up, not necessarily messes, but making everything a possible part of the MCU by just saying it's a different universe, right? So any Marvel thing that's ever happened could possibly be integrated into the MCU because of a multiverse. It's just they'll pick and choose what they want to include and what they won't. And it seems like Tom Hardy's Venom is something they are going to include in the moment. So intriguing. I don't think of it mind blowing because I kind of thought it was pretty expected. That's why when people are like, holy shit, that mid credit sequence, I'm like, right when they said that, I'm like, oh, it's probably going to be Tom Holland showing up or something like that. I'm like, oh, it's not even him showing up. It's just a version of the scene at the end of No Way Home, or I mean, Far From Home.
I think I
But
would have been more blown away if like Ben Affleck's Daredevil showed up, but like that would have been more
still could
blowing.
happen. You never know,
Yeah.
man. I said any MCU or any Marvel property could potentially be used. That's why like Multiverse of Madness is the most intriguing, right? Like,
Well, even
is
that
like
has been rumored to be like, apparently, like some people are saying, like I think it was like Chris Tapley posted like, oh, if you think,
Spider-Man's wild. Like,
yeah,
just
wait
wait
until
for
you see
this.
Doctor Strange too.
And I'm like, I would not be surprised if Nick Cage shows up as fucking Ghost Rider, and like all this random Marvel stuff for every Marvel movie that's ever happened just starts like popping
Wesley
up. And
Snipes' Blade pops in to kind of like pass off
if
the torch to Mahershala Ali.
yeah, like who knows, man? Like I have no idea. So it's exciting, I guess, but like I don't love these Venom movies, so that was kind of a bummer. But then like there is some potential there of maybe Tom Holland Spider-Man gets the symbiote suit in No Way Home at some point, and that's super dope. But
Well,
like, or
to me,
maybe that's how it ends, and like,
I think the hope here is that maybe Venom will become kind of like Hulk. So with the Hulk movies, with both the Ang Lee film and the Louis Leterrier movie, Hulk clearly didn't work on its own as a solo film. But that first Avengers movie, when Mark Ruffalo plays him and is introduced as the Hulk and Bruce Banner, he works really well as a side character, and he works as a team player. And that, like, you look at like Mark Ruffalo throughout the MCU, he's never had his own film. The closest he's come to that is going to be with She-Hulk, probably, which will be the series coming out next year. I could see Venom working better as a side character, supporting player, in the way that Hulk really worked quite well in that first Avengers movie and really surprised people.
yeah,
And maybe after, if it works the way that that the Hulk did with the Avengers, maybe going down the line, you just have Venom pop up as a supporting player again, and that'll
yeah.
work to
Movies
the
are too
character's
successful though that,
advantage.
I mean, he'll still get solo movies, but maybe he'll show up more often. To your point, but
Yeah.
uh, I'm I'm excited for Spider-Man No Way Home, man. Like, I can't wait to see what that movie is, and we're only, oh, man, 2 months away from it. So,
Yeah, we still have
um,
Eternals, and we still have Hawkeye to come along, so probably even more
the end of What If
questions will
next
be
week too.
presented. Yeah,
The
yeah.
end of
So
What If. So maybe we'll do another conversation after What If and stuff like that. And we'll probably use this channel as kind of our spoiler area, our one-off conversations, our interviews, and things like that. So if you want more, keep an eye on this channel, Untitled Movie Conversations. But you can also get it on YouTube, on Untitled Movies YouTube channel. We also have a review out for Venom: Let There Be Carnage, which I just mentioned earlier in the show, as well as a ton of other reviews for things from TIFF and afterwards. And we'll be continuing to review everything for the rest of the year and forever, for all eternity, never ending.
the
Um,
never-ending story.
and then we have another show, which is our flagship show, Untitled Movie Podcast. Would love for you guys to check that out. Also on YouTube and podcast services everywhere. As always, my name is Matt Rorabeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rorabeck.
And I'm Eric Marchen. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Venom, baby. He's back in action.
Not your best, but